The day my 8-year-old stepson destroyed my mother-in-law's life with a single question. I was standing in her perfect living room, holding a baby that wasn't mine. I just didn't know it yet. "Grandma," Colton said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife through butter. "Should I tell Mommy how many babies you've sold? Or should I show her the pictures I took of that room in the hospital basement?" The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. My mother-in-law, Vivian, who 5 seconds earlier had been calmly explaining how she'd switched my newborn daughter at the hospital because the other one was prettier, went completely white. Her teacup rattled against the saucer as her hands began to shake. "My name is Delaney, and until an hour ago, I thought the worst thing my mother-in-law had ever done was criticize my cooking at Thanksgiving. I'm 29 years old, married to Preston for 2 years, and I just spent the last month raising a stranger's baby while my biological daughter was living with complete strangers who'd paid $40,000 for her. Let me back up, because you need to understand who these people are to grasp how insane this moment was. Vivian Sterling wasn't just any grandmother, she was a respected retired NICU nurse with 30 years of experience, connections at every hospital in the state, and a reputation for being the woman who could calm any crying baby. She volunteered at church nurseries, organized charity drives for new mothers in need, and had been voted Healthcare Hero of the Year 3 times by our local newspaper. Preston, my husband, is 32 and owns a construction company. He's the kind of man who still brings his mother flowers every Sunday and believed she could do no wrong. When we started dating, he warned me that his mother could be particular about things. But he said it with such affection that I thought he meant she was just fussy about table settings or something equally harmless. Colton came into my life as part of the package deal with Preston. His first wife had died in a car accident when Colton was 3, and for years it had been just Preston, Colton, and Grandma Vivian against the world. The boy was quiet, observant, and had these deep brown eyes that seemed to take in everything while saying nothing. I loved him immediately, and he'd started calling me Mom about 6 months after Preston and I got married. And then there was baby Aria, or at least the baby I thought was Aria. For the past month, I'd been feeding, changing, and singing to sleep a beautiful baby girl with delicate features, porcelain skin, and fine blonde hair. She was picture perfect, the kind of baby people stop to admire in grocery stores, but she wasn't mine. My real daughter, the one Vivian had stolen from me hours after birth, was living across town with a couple named the Weatherbys. They'd been told she was the unwanted child of a teenage drug addict. They'd named her Bethany and had already started planning her first birthday party, even though she was only 5 weeks old. Standing in Vivian's living room that day, watching her facade crack like expensive china dropping on marble, I realized I'd been living in a carefully constructed lie. Every sweet smile, every offer to help with the baby, every compliment about what a natural mother I was had been part of something so twisted I couldn't fully process it. "Colton, sweetheart," Vivian started, her voice pitched high with panic. "You don't understand what you're saying. Grandma was just trying to help everyone." "No," Colton said firmly, and I'd never been prouder of him. "You made me keep secrets. You said if I told Dad about the hospital room, something bad would happen to him. But I know you were lying now. You're the bad thing." Preston hadn't said a word since Colton started talking. He stood frozen by the window, his face cycling through emotions I'd never seen before. Betrayal, rage, disgust, and a grief so deep it made my chest ache just watching him. This was his mother, the woman who'd raised him, who'd helped him through his first wife's death, who'd been there for every milestone of Colton's life. "How many?" I heard myself ask, my voice surprisingly steady. "How many babies have you stolen?" Vivian lifted her chin, and for a moment I saw the woman she really was. Not the doting grandmother or the respected nurse, but someone who believed she had the right to play God with other people's lives. "I didn't steal anyone," she said coldly. "I improved their situations. I gave better babies to better families. It's simple economics, really. Supply and demand." That's when I knew we weren't dealing with a momentary lapse in judgment or a single terrible decision. We were standing in the living room of a monster who'd been wearing a grandmother mask for so long that everyone, including her own son, had forgotten there was something else underneath. 3 months before my world exploded, I thought I had won the mother-in-law lottery. Vivian Sterling didn't just accept me into the family. She welcomed me with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for long-lost relatives returning from war. When Preston proposed, she was the first person he called, and I could hear her screaming with joy through the phone from across the restaurant. "Finally," she'd said at our engagement dinner, raising her glass of wine, "someone who can keep my son in line and give me beautiful grandbabies." Everyone laughed. I blushed. Preston squeezed my hand under the table, and I remember thinking how lucky I was to marry into such a warm family. The pregnancy announcement came 6 months after our wedding. We told Vivian first, even before my own parents who lived across the country. She immediately took charge, creating spreadsheets of baby names, booking appointments with the best obstetricians, and transforming Preston's old bedroom into a nursery that looked like it belonged in a magazine. She painted the walls a soft lavender, hung crystal butterflies from the ceiling, and bought a rocking chair that cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. "Nothing but the best for my granddaughter," she'd say, somehow certain it would be a girl before any ultrasound confirmed it. She was right, of course. Vivian was always right about babies. It was her gift, she said, from decades of working in the NICU. During my pregnancy, Vivian became my constant companion. She drove me to appointments when Preston was working, cooked elaborate meals full of prenatal vitamins and organic vegetables, and regaled me with stories from her nursing days. She knew every doctor, every nurse, every technician at St. Mary's Hospital. Walking through those halls with her was like being escorted by royalty. "I delivered my first baby when I was 22, she told me one afternoon, folding tiny onesies with military precision. The mother was a young thing, scared out of her mind. The baby came out blue, not breathing. Everyone else panicked, but I knew exactly what to do. Saved that baby's life. The mother named her after me. Vivian Rose Thompson, probably married with kids of her own by now. She had hundreds of these stories. Babies saved, mothers comforted, families reunited. She painted herself as a guardian angel in scrubs, and I believed every word. Why wouldn't I? The hospital walls were covered with photos of Vivian holding newborns, thank you cards from grateful parents, and commendations from hospital administrators. The labor started at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Preston called his mother before we even left for the hospital. She met us there, already in scrubs she kept for special occasions, chatting with the night staff like she'd never left. Dr. Hendricks, my obstetrician, seemed relieved to see her. "Vivian's assisted with more deliveries than most doctors," he told me between contractions. "You're in excellent hands." She held my hand through transition, coached me through pushing, and was the first person besides the medical staff to hold Aria when she entered the world at 6:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because Vivian announced it like a town crier, tears streaming down her face. "She's perfect," she whispered, cradling my daughter with practiced ease. "Absolutely perfect." Aria was beautiful in that raw, newborn way. She had a full head of dark hair plastered to her scalp, Preston's distinctive chin dimple, and when she finally opened her eyes, they were the same hazel as my father's. But what I remembered most was the birthmark on her left cheek, a reddish-purple crescent moon that the nurse assured me would fade with time. "Character marks," Vivian called them, though I noticed her frowning at it when she thought I wasn't looking. "Some babies are just marked for greatness." The exhaustion hit me like a freight train after delivery. Vivian suggested the nurses take Aria to the nursery for cleaning and testing while I rested. "You need your strength, dear. She'll be back before you know it." I dozed off watching Vivian follow the nurses out, her hand proprietary on the bassinet. When I woke an hour later, Preston was holding a baby against his chest, tears in his eyes. "She's incredible," he whispered. "Look how peaceful she is." Something felt different, but I couldn't place it through the fog of exhaustion and pain medication. This baby seemed smaller, quieter. Her hair looked lighter, though the nurse said that was normal after washing. The birthmark seemed fainter, but Vivian assured me it was just the better lighting in the recovery room. "All babies look different after they're cleaned up properly," she said, with the authority of someone who'd seen thousands of newborns. The swelling goes down, the features settle. Trust me, dear, Mother knows best. I should have questioned it. Should have insisted on checking the ankle bracelet, comparing the footprints, something. But I was 29 years old, holding what I thought was my first child, surrounded by people I trusted, in a place where Vivian's word was gospel. How was I supposed to know that the woman smiling benevolently at me had just stolen my daughter? The first crack in my perfect postpartum bubble came during a routine weight check when Arya was 3 weeks old. The pediatric nurse frowned at her chart, checked it again, then called Dr. Hendricks over. They whispered in the corner while I sat there, holding this beautiful baby who suddenly felt like a stranger in my arms. Just a discrepancy in the blood type records, Dr. Hendricks said finally, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. The hospital must have mixed up the initial typing. We'll run it again at the 1-month appointment. Vivian was with me that day, as she always was. She laughed it off immediately. Hospitals make these clerical errors all the time. When Preston was born, they had him listed as a girl for 3 days. Bureaucratic nonsense. But that night, I couldn't stop staring at the baby sleeping in her bassinet. Her features were delicate, refined, nothing like the strong nose I'd seen in the delivery room or Preston's distinctive jawline. When I mentioned it to Preston, he rubbed my back and suggested I talk to someone about postpartum anxiety. Mom says it's completely normal, he assured me. She's seen hundreds of new mothers go through this. You're bonding perfectly with Arya. Don't let your mind play tricks on you. The tricks, though, kept piling up. Vivian had donated all the newborn clothes we'd bought before the birth, claiming they were too small already. She deleted the delivery room photos from my phone during what she called an accidental factory reset, while helping me set up a baby monitoring app. When my sister visited and commented that Arya looked nothing like either of us, Vivian quickly explained that babies often resemble distant relatives before settling into their parents' features. My cousin's baby looked Korean for 6 months, she said, laughing. We're Irish and German. Genetics are funny that way. The 1-month appointment arrived like a court date I'd been dreading. Dr. Hendricks ran the blood test himself this time. When he called us back into his office instead of the regular exam room, my stomach dropped. Preston was at work, but Vivian had insisted on coming for moral support. The blood type doesn't match either parent, Dr. Hendricks said carefully. This is highly unusual. I recommend we run a DNA test to rule out any laboratory errors. Vivian's reaction was immediate and forceful. That's absolutely ridiculous. DNA tests are expensive and unnecessary. Blood typing errors happen constantly. Are you really going to put new parents through this stress over a lab mistake? But her protests only made me more certain. We're doing the test, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. The next 5 days waiting for results were torture. Vivian visited daily, each time with a new explanation. Maybe Preston wasn't the biological father. Maybe I'd had a rare genetic mutation. Maybe the baby had chimera syndrome. She threw out medical terms like confetti, trying to bury my suspicions under an avalanche of possibilities. Meanwhile, I started investigating on my own. I called the hospital for copies of the birth records. They were mysteriously incomplete. The nursery log for that night showed a gap during the exact time Arya would have been cleaned and tested. The nurse who'd helped with delivery had quit suddenly the week after Arya was born, leaving no forwarding information. Then Vivian made a mistake. She mentioned her church friend, Dottie Weatherby, had just adopted a baby girl. Such a blessing for them after years of trying. The baby even looks like she could be family, dark hair and all. Isn't God wonderful? Dark hair. My Arya had been born with dark hair. The DNA results came on a Thursday afternoon. I was home alone when I opened the email. 0% probability of biological relationship. The words blurred as I read them over and over. This wasn't my baby. The child I'd been nursing, singing to, loving for 5 weeks, wasn't mine. Preston came home to find me sitting on the kitchen floor, holding the printed results. He read them 3 times before speaking. There has to be a mistake. The lab made an error. We'll test again. Your mother was there, I said quietly. She followed the baby to the nursery. She had access. She knows everyone at that hospital. You're accusing my mother of what exactly? Stealing our baby? That's insane, Delaney. But even as he defended her, I saw the doubt creeping into his eyes. He'd noticed things too, the way Vivian constantly praised this baby's features while making subtle digs about unfortunate genetics in other families, how she'd mentioned that some babies were better suited for certain families, the way she'd insisted on being present for every milestone, as if checking that her handiwork remained undetected. "We need to talk to her," I said. "Tonight?" Preston nodded slowly, his face aging 10 years in that moment. "God help us, Delaney. What if you're right?" We drove to Vivian's house in silence, both of us preparing for a conversation that would either destroy my marriage or destroy Preston's relationship with his mother. I held the DNA results in my lap like evidence in a murder trial, which in a way they were, evidence of the murder of the life we thought we'd been living. Vivian opened her door wearing an apron covered in flour, the picture of domestic innocence. "What a lovely surprise! I just pulled cookies out of the oven. Colton's here doing homework." We sat in her living room like we had 100 times before, but everything felt different now. The family photos on the mantel seemed to mock us. There was one of Vivian holding Aria at the hospital, and I noticed for the first time how her smile looked more like victory than joy. Preston cleared his throat twice before speaking. "Mom, the DNA test came back. The baby isn't ours." Vivian didn't flinch. She set down her teacup with steady hands and looked me directly in the eyes. "Well, of course she isn't yours biologically, but she's yours in every way that matters now, isn't she?" The casual admission knocked the wind out of me. Preston's face went white. "What did you do?" "I improved your situation," Vivian said simply. "Your biological daughter was unfortunate looking. Large nose, thin lips, that awful birthmark covering half her cheek. The baby you have now is beautiful. She'll have an easier life, better opportunities. I did what any loving grandmother would do." "You stole our child?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "I exchanged her. There's a difference. The Weatherbys needed a baby and had money to spare. You needed a better baby but didn't know it yet. Everyone won." Preston stood up so abruptly his knee hit the coffee table, sending cookies scattering across the floor. "The Weatherbys? Dottie and Robert Weatherby have our daughter?" "They paid $40,000 for a healthy white newborn," Vivian continued, as if discussing a real estate transaction. "Your original baby would have only fetched $15,000 with that birthmark, but I gave her to them at a discount. They're good people, church-going. They'll raise her well." I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. "I'm calling the police." Vivian laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "And tell them what? That a respected retired nurse with 30 years of spotless service switched babies? Where's your proof? The hospital records show everything was normal. The nurses on duty will swear the baby was never out of proper custody. It's your word against an entire system that trusts me." That's when Colton appeared in the doorway, Preston's old iPhone in his hands. "I have proof, Dad." We all turned to stare at the 8-year-old boy who looked far too serious for his age. He walked over to Preston and handed him the phone. "I've been recording Grandma for 2 months, ever since I heard her on the phone talking about inventory that didn't make sense." Vivian's composure finally cracked. "Colton, sweetheart, you don't understand what you heard." "I understood enough," Colton said firmly. "You told someone that the latest batch was ready and that the blonde one would bring top dollar. You weren't talking about cookies." Preston scrolled through the phone, his face growing darker with each video. "There are dozens of recordings here. Phone calls, conversations, even videos of you at the hospital in areas you shouldn't have access to anymore." "You had him spy on me?" Vivian's voice rose to a shriek. "My own grandson?" "I did it myself," Colton said, stepping closer to me as if seeking protection. "You scared me, Grandma. You said if I told anyone about the special room at the hospital, something bad would happen to Dad. But Ms. Rodriguez at school taught us that when adults make kids keep scary secrets, we should tell someone safe." I dialed 911 while Vivian ranted about ungrateful families and how she'd only tried to help. The operator heard enough of her shouting in the background to send units immediately. While we waited, I demanded more information. "How many babies have you done this to?" Vivian seemed to realize she was already caught. The mask fell away completely, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. 12 successful exchanges over 5 years, all carefully selected, all improved situations. Where do you keep them? Preston's voice was deadly quiet. Colton mentioned a special room. The old NICU storage area in the hospital's east basement. It was decommissioned years ago, but I kept the keys. Sometimes the timing doesn't work out perfectly. Families need a few days to gather money or travel from out of state. The babies wait there. Babies are waiting there now? I felt sick. Just 2. The Martinez twins. Their buyer arrives tomorrow from Florida. Preston made another call, this time to the FBI. Kidnapping across state lines made this federal. Within minutes, we heard sirens approaching from multiple directions. Vivian sat perfectly still, sipping her tea as if police weren't about to destroy her life. "You'll thank me one day," she said to me, "when your daughter grows up beautiful and successful instead of bullied and rejected." "She was perfect," I said, tears finally coming. "She was absolutely perfect exactly as she was." "No baby is perfect," Vivian replied coldly, "but some are worth more than others. I simply recognized market value where others saw sentiment." The police burst through the door just as Colton asked the question that would haunt me forever. "Grandma, what happened to the babies nobody wanted to buy?" Vivian's silence was the loudest answer I'd ever heard. The police officers filled Vivian's living room, but everything stopped when Detective Angela Morrison arrived with an FBI team. She took one look at the scene, an 8-year-old boy holding evidence, a grandmother still sipping tea like nothing was wrong, and immediately took control. "Mrs. Sterling, I need you to put down the teacup and stand up slowly," Detective Morrison said. Vivian complied with an exaggerated sigh. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding. I helped facilitate private adoptions. Everything was consensual." "Grandma," Colton suddenly spoke up from where he stood beside me, his small voice cutting through the room. "Should I tell them about the special room in the hospital basement where you keep the babies? Or should I tell them about the red notebook where you write down the prices?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vivian's face went from annoyed to genuinely frightened. "Colton doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a confused little boy." "I'm not confused," Colton said, pulling a small red notebook from his backpack. "You dropped this in your car last week. I was going to give it back, but then I read what was inside." Detective Morrison took the notebook with gloved hands, flipped through a few pages, and her expression darkened. "We need units at St. Mary's Hospital immediately. East basement, old NICU storage area." She looked at Colton with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're a very brave young man. Can you tell me exactly what you saw in that room?" "Empty cribs," Colton said quietly. "Lots of them, but 2 had babies in them last Tuesday when Grandma took me there. She said she was getting something from storage, but she was checking on the babies. She had formula and diapers hidden behind old equipment." Within 20 minutes, the call came through Detective Morrison's radio. They'd found the room exactly where Colton described. 2 infant twins, approximately 3 weeks old, were discovered in makeshift cribs. They were healthy, but showed signs of minimal care. Hospital records showed both babies had supposedly been stillborn. Their teenage mother was currently in psychiatric care, believing she'd lost both children. The investigation exploded from there. Vivian's notebook contained detailed records of every transaction, names, dates, prices, and most horrifyingly, ratings for each baby's market value based on appearance, race, and health. She'd noted which doctors were on duty, which nurses could be avoided, and how long each baby could be kept before questions arose. 12 babies, Detective Morrison read from the notebook, but there are 15 entries here. That's when Vivian finally broke. 3 didn't survive the waiting period. Sometimes the families took too long to arrive, or the babies were too fragile. It wasn't my fault. I'm not equipped for long-term care in that basement. The room erupted. Preston lunged for his mother before 2 officers restrained him. I collapsed into a chair, the weight of what she'd just admitted crushing me. 3 babies had died in her makeshift nursery while she waited for buyers who never came. "Where are they?" Detective Morrison demanded. "Where are the 3 who didn't make it?" "Cremated," Vivian said flatly. "I have connections at the funeral home. They were logged as medical waste from the hospital. No one asked questions about medical waste." The FBI agent in charge made another call. Within hours, they'd tracked down all 12 living babies from Vivian's ledger. The Weatherbys were at their home, celebrating their daughter's 5-week birthday when police arrived. 6 other families across 4 states got similar visits. Each had been told different stories about teenage mothers, drug addicts, or women who couldn't afford their babies. All had paid between $20,000 and $50,000 for what they believed were legal private adoptions. At 3 a.m., after hours of questioning and verification, a social worker arrived at the police station where Preston and I had been waiting. She carried a car seat with a sleeping baby inside. My baby. My real daughter. She had my nose, exactly as I remembered from those first moments after birth. Preston's distinctive chin dimple was prominent even in sleep. And there on her left cheek was the birthmark, the crescent moon that Vivian had called unfortunate. It was beautiful. She was beautiful. Her name is Aria, I told the social worker who'd been calling her Bethany. Her real name is Aria. The Weatherbys had agreed to the immediate transfer after learning the truth. They were victims too, their hearts broken by losing a baby they'd already loved, their savings depleted by what they thought was a legal adoption. But they did the right thing without hesitation. The other baby, the one I'd been raising for 5 weeks, belonged to a 19-year-old named Theodora. She'd been told her baby had died during an emergency C-section. When she arrived at the station and saw her daughter for the first time, she fell to her knees sobbing. They told me she was gone. They told me I'd imagined hearing her cry. We sat together in that police station, 2 mothers holding our biological children while grieving the babies we'd lost to each other. The twisted symphony Vivian had orchestrated had changed all our lives forever, but at least we'd found our way back to the truth. Detective Morrison stood before us with an update. We've arrested 4 hospital employees so far. This goes deeper than just your mother-in-law, Mr. Sterling. She had a network. Preston, who'd been silent for hours, finally spoke. Good, get them all. The trial lasted 6 months. Vivian Sterling was charged with 37 counts, including kidnapping, fraud, illegal adoption trafficking, and 3 counts of involuntary manslaughter for the babies who died in her basement nursery. She got 60 years without the possibility of parole. She'll die in prison, which seems fitting for someone who stole the most precious moments of so many lives. The network she'd built came crashing down like dominoes. 2 doctors who'd falsified death certificates, 3 nurses who'd looked the other way, and a funeral home director who'd cremated infant remains without proper documentation. Even the hospital's head of security was arrested for disabling cameras and providing Vivian with keys to restricted areas. St. Mary's Hospital faced dozens of lawsuits and eventually closed permanently. Preston and I almost didn't make it through. For months, he couldn't look at Aria without seeing his mother's crime. He blamed himself for not seeing what she really was, for bringing me into her web, for exposing Colton to such darkness. The man who'd once brought his mother flowers every Sunday now flinched when anyone mentioned her name. Therapy saved us. Individual, couples, family. Colton needed it most of all. That brave little boy had carried the weight of his grandmother's threats, thinking he was protecting his father by keeping quiet. His therapist called him a hero, but heroes shouldn't be 8 years old with nightmares about empty cribs and crying that no one else can hear. The support group started naturally. Theodora and I met for coffee one week after getting our babies back. Then the Weatherbys joined us, needing to process their grief over losing Bethany while dealing with the guilt of having unknowingly participated in kidnapping. Soon all 12 families were meeting monthly, sharing our strange, horrible bond. Some families had happier endings than others. 7 babies were returned to their biological parents within days of Vivian's arrest, but 5 had been sold across state lines with fabricated adoption papers so convincing that courts needed months to untangle the mess. 2 of those children stayed with their adoptive families after their biological parents. All teenagers decided the stable homes were better than starting over. The 3 babies who died in Vivian's basement nursery haunt me most. Their names were never recorded in her ledger, just listed as unsuccessful transactions. Their teenage mothers had been told they were stillborn, grieved them, and moved on. When Detective Morrison informed them of the truth, one mother said something that still echoes in my mind. I knew I heard him cry. Everyone said I was hallucinating from the drugs, but I knew. Aria is 3 years old now. The birthmark Vivian called unfortunate has faded to a light pink shadow, but it's still visible when she laughs, which is often. She's fearless and loud and messy, everything Vivian would have hated. When strangers comment on her beauty, I tell them she's perfect, birthmark and all. Because perfection isn't about meeting someone else's standards. It's about being exactly who you're meant to be. Colton is 11 and wants to be a detective. He keeps a journal where he writes down everything he observes, a habit that started as trauma response but evolved into genuine interest. He's protective of Aria in a way that breaks my heart, always checking that she's really ours, that no one will take her again. We've assured him 1,000 times that she's safe, but trust, once shattered by someone you love, takes time to rebuild. Preston finally opened the last letter Vivian sent from prison last month. She wanted him to know she forgave us for ruining her life's work. She still believed she'd been helping, improving lives, giving better babies to better families. No remorse, no understanding that babies aren't products to be upgraded or exchanged based on market value. He burned the letter in our backyard while Aria played on her swing set. Some people, he said, watching the smoke rise, shouldn't be mothers or grandmothers. The question that haunts every family in our support group is simple. How many more Vivians are out there? How many babies are living with the wrong families? How many mothers are mourning children who aren't actually gone? The FBI found 2 similar operations during their investigation, one in Oregon and another in Maine, both run by former nurses, both targeting vulnerable young mothers, both ranking babies by their perceived value. Last week, Theodora and I took our daughters to the park together. We watched them play, these 2 girls who were switched at birth by a woman who thought she knew better than nature, better than love, better than the bond between mother and child. They're friends now, connected by a story they're too young to understand. A grandmother stopped to admire them, commenting on how beautiful they both were. "Perfect little angels," she said. "Yes," I replied, pulling both girls closer. "They're perfect exactly as they are." Because that's the lesson Vivian never learned and never will. Every child is priceless to someone. Every baby is beautiful to the mother who carried them. And love, real love, doesn't rank or rate or measure market value. Love just loves, birthmarks and all. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and share it with others who need to hear it. Your comments mean everything, so let me know your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories that will leave you speechless. Remember, sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that actually happened.